Hello everyone, I am back for part 2. I had hoped to put this video out last week, 1 week after the first one, but my cat died, and as you might expect, that has, shall we say, taken up a lot of energetic space. Those of you who knew me, I imagine this lands a certain way for you. She was 17 and a half, late 80s in human years, and died as peacefully and gently as one could ever hope. Naturally, at home, surrounded by people who love her. Still, it's inherently pretty big. I am intending to make a tribute video for her, so stay tuned to my channel for that. Anyways, when we left off, I had just sacrificed my lower digestive tract to the gods of cancer prevention. And thinking that that was it, and I could carry on with my life, had started to do so. Of course, COVID had just hit, so this was all in the middle of the first round of lockdowns and the surrealness of that I spoke with Paul Climo, and he told me the margins were narrow and recommended chemo. So this catalyzed a whirlwind of a time. I went and spoke also to the oncologist here, and my mom found Neil McKinney, one of the preeminent naturopathic oncologists who was based in Victoria, and I spoke with him as well. He echoed the recommendation to do chemo. So having that coming from someone who's outside of the mainstream, well, I found it persuasive. There was also talk about doing radiation therapy, so a big consult there, and we were very seriously looking at me going and living in Vancouver for almost 2 months with my sister, and upending my whole life to do that. That didn't end up happening. It was decided that given the location that would be irradiated, plus my history of inflammatory bowel disease, plus the amount of time that had passed since the surgery, the risks outweighed the benefits for radiation. So we eschewed that, we being the team of doctors and myself. But went ahead with the chemo. So it was a blend of 3 different chemicals called FOLFOX, F-O-L-F-O-X, fluorosin, leucovorin, and oxaliplatin. And I am sad that I know that. I started in the very beginning of June. There was a bit of a process, of course, to get everything, arranged and set up. I had my first dose of chemo in the very beginning of June. And that was basically my summer of 2020. I decided not to go back to work after things started to reopen post-COVID and just be with whatever chemo did. It was so much easier than I anticipated. I thought it would be like the movies, throwing up constantly, hair falling out, all of that. I do not know what it would have been like had I not worked closely with Dr. McKinney, the naturopath. But I did. And he had a very specific regimen of supplements for the very specific chemo drugs and their effects on the body. So I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't taken that naturopathic support, but I did, and the chemo was really not that bad. Like, it still sucked. There were two really, really noteworthy things, which I'll share because I guess it's interesting. If not, skip ahead or whatever. The first was cold-induced neuropathy. Anywhere on my body that touched something cold for the first few days after chemo would get this very unpleasant nerve sensation, kind of like going in a hot tub if you've just been in the cold plunge or rolling in the snow. Not exactly like that, but quite similar. Yeah, like, so cold drinks were out, even, cutting veggies that were straight out of the fridge, it would show up. And what really, really was worrying me is that that particular side effect can be permanent. And that would, of course, wreck my, ability to do winter sports. Blessedly, it was not. The second was just the toxicity. 3 to 5 days after each dose of chemo, I would have a day where I just felt like garbage on all levels, just physically really ill, having brain fog, difficulty focusing, no motivation, pretty low emotionally. But every time, following my day of peak toxicity, I would have a night of vivid, profound, meaningful, cinematic dreams. And then wake up in the morning feeling totally clear and like myself again. Each round of chemo that happened. What I interpret it as is that the massive amounts of cell death was just clearing stuff out that had accumulated within my being in a great holistic purge. So I decided that chemo was kind of like shitty white person's ayahuasca. I have one more story, which is that I told the oncologist in Trail. He's not actually an oncologist, but the closest we have. That I was working with a naturopath and taking these supplements. And the next time I came in, I was handed this piece of paper with all these highlighted bits. The main one thesis being, we do not recommend the use of supplements during chemotherapy. So I was like, okay, I'll talk to my naturopath about this. So I talked to Dr. McKinney, and I was like, yeah, the folks at the hospital say I shouldn't be taking any supplements while doing chemo. And he said, they can go fuck themselves. I love that man. He is now retired. So I did chemo for a couple of months. It was kind of terrible, but not as terrible as I thought it would be. And bounced back really well. I was back at work like a week and a half after my last round of it. So, okay, now we're done. So I got back to life, and had my last chemo in August. Had a screening in December, blood test and a CAT scan, and everything was fine. Nothing at all out of the ordinary showed up on either of them. So that was a heck of a day. That was very, very affirming. So I carried on and had a great winter. Had a good spring. And then in May, got a case of food poisoning. This is May of last year, 21. And my digestion just didn't get better. No matter what I did. And I had about 3 weeks of just feeling ill and having really loose stools. And I tried this and that and, really, really simplifying my diet. Nothing was getting better. So in the beginning of June, I checked myself into the hospital. And they couldn't find anything particularly wrong. And after a few days in the hospital, I developed a total bowel obstruction. My second. And it was very painful. And I had another emergency surgery. And this was my third, being splayed open like a fish. And what was found was that my intestines had become just, what would the word be? There's a word I'm looking for. Well, just overcome with adhesions. Basically, scar tissue had wrapped itself all around my intestines and was keeping them from functioning and also squeezing to the point where nothing was passing in one point. So an adhesolysive, cutting open, cutting apart, adhesions procedure was done and sewed me back up. And I recovered in the hospital, and my digestion started working again, and I recovered from the surgery through the summer. And we're getting pretty close to present day. And right before I was discharged, at the end of June, they had done some biopsies of my intestines while the surgery was happening. And I was well enough to go home, and my doctor came in. He was like, let me just check and see if that biopsy pathology results have come back. So as I was packing all my stuff up and waiting for my family to arrive, he came back and he said, found some cancer cells sitting on your small intestine in a couple places. So I wasn't done with all that. And what turned from a celebratory day turned into something profoundly jarring. So it was decided to put that aside and focus on recovering from this major abdominal surgery. So I did. And then went to see the oncologist, and he suggested going back on chemotherapy. And I was like, well, I think I'll wait. I'm going to wait till the spring. I'm still not fully recovered. I don't want to have cold-induced neuropathy during winter. And I'm going to see if maybe there's other things I can do in the meantime. Also, I didn't want to go through chemotherapy while COVID was freaking everywhere, which it was over the winter, if you'll recall. Fate had other plans. So, at the end of September, my digestion started to have problems again. And it wasn't as fast as it had been in June, but it ended up basically the same. Extremely loose stools that nothing would do anything for, and by God, I tried everything. Spent hours a day in practice, acupunctured myself every day, saw so many different practitioners, tried so many different supplements. Basically was like drinking elemental nutrition to give my bowels a rest. Nothing. So went to the hospital to get a CAT scan to see what was up with my intestines at the end of October. And that was pretty useless for my digestion. There was like, looks like maybe there's a partial obstruction. But they did say, oh, looks like you got a new tumor going on in your lateral left pelvis. And it's growing. That was October 28th. And on November 1st, I did what's called a planned admission to the hospital. And this brings us kind of up to the current crisis. My digestion was basically not working. So I was put on TPN, Total Parenteral Nutrition, which is IV complete nutrition. And that's how I was kept alive for the better part of 2 months. While my intestines just didn't work, nor did my stomach. I would try to eat some food and it would just feel horrible, and I would try to throw it up, but my stomach wouldn't contract. My guts were pretty much non-functional. I did not, however, develop a total obstruction. So that was great. It looked like I might have been heading there, but that was avoided, and that's a mini story for another time. My trip to Kelowna, which was hellish. So, because I was sort of in the clutches of Western medicine, and because they thought it might have something to do with my digestion, and because they wanted to just do it anyways, went back on chemotherapy, FOLFOX again. Did a round in November, and it was pretty okay. Relatively minor side effects. And then did a round in December. And that wrecked me. In Chinese medicine, we say there's something called our zheng qi, which means like basically our homeostasis, our body's ability to keep itself functioning, our fundamental like okayness, separate from individual organ systems. And we say that chemotherapy can damage the zheng qi. And that was theoretical for me until I experienced it. It was like there was a piece of my vitality just absent. A feeling of great malaise and just this phenomenal, bizarre fatigue. It would take me 5 minutes to, get up to get something. I would be reading or looking out the window or what have you and just like fall asleep. I was just like that. And this time I had really brutal nausea. and vomiting. And cold-induced neuropathy that did not go away after a few days. It lasted for a couple of weeks, and that was frightening. So, blessedly, I called in a bunch of support and got on some good herbal medicine and, time eventually. And after a couple weeks, felt decent again. My Zheng Qi returned. But whew. I was discharged from the hospital, and that's a whole mini story as well, on December 24th. And that day, my digestion miraculously began to improve that same day. So since then, I've been, at my folks' place for a few weeks and then home. And what I'm eating is very limited, and my digestion is still very sensitive and often doesn't feel too good. But I'm maintaining and slowly improving. So that's pretty much the story up to now. You've seen the updates about the latest screening and all that. I don't think there's anything of great substance that I've missed. That's been my journey. And it's not how I thought I'd spend my sort of middle adulthood. But destiny is mysterious, as I like to say. And we'll see where it takes me going on from here. This was a long video. Thanks for your time and attention. I hope it was interesting and, maybe brought some benefit in some ways. Thank you, everyone, as always, for your ongoing support, both personal and financial. And we'll talk more soon. Bye-bye.